Welcome everyone to the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, and thank you for joining us. Today we'll be talking about teaching social emotional competencies and mentoring programs. I'm Ray Hoskins and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. So let's get started. This webinar is part of the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through the National Mentoring Resources Center and facilitated in partnership with Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. These webinars would not be possible without the planning team, which includes the mentoring partnerships shown on this slide. In addition to this webinar series, the NMRC provides resources for mentoring practitioners. At the end of this webinar, we'll provide more details about how you can access this free support. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and to view the webinar recording. You can also access this information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. And to continually improve this series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar, so please take 3 minutes of your time to give us your feedback. We want this to be a participatory experience, so please use the question box to ask questions during the webinar. Minnie Chen will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We may not get to all questions because there are several hundred of you on the webinar, but we will do our best. The questions that we share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. First, to get a sense of who is with us today, we have 2 short polls. What is your experience level in the mentoring field? We'll give you a second to do that. So most of you are experienced. We have about 27% of us who are beginners, and 10% of us are actually experts. Thank you. The second poll: what is your role in the mentoring field? Practitioner, researcher, technical assistance provider, funder, or other? So most of you are practitioners. We have some researchers, technical assistance providers, no funders, darn, and 29% are others. Okay, well, thank you everyone, and think and hope today's information will be applicable to everyone on the line. I am Ray Hoskins. I've been dedicated to developing social and emotional competencies since my work with H. Stephen Glenn in the early 70s. I've worked with the Search Institute Asset Model, various risk protective models, and recently with the Indiana and Cassell models of SEL competency development. I have consulted to several mentoring programs over the last 9 years, and I believe mentoring is a key component in helping youth develop the attributes and skills they need to create meaningful lives. Darren Heil is another one of our panelists. Darren has been married to Elizabeth Heil for 16 years. They have 2 girls, Zoe, who is 13, and Myra, who's 7. Their dog, Jax, couldn't sit still, so he isn't in the photo. Darren started a nonprofit called Youth Mentoring Initiative in Fishers, Indiana in 2007. YMI provides school-based mentor programs to the Hamilton Southeastern School Corporation. They have about 300 active mentor-mentee matches in 9 schools at this time. He is currently helping Noblesville schools start their own mentor program and is currently the Community Enrichment Coordinator for Gaylor Electric. His role is to expand the employee pool by an enhanced presence in local schools, grow company-wide social responsibility efforts, and grow Gaylor's network in surrounding communities throughout the country. Another one of our panelists is Mike DeMarco. Mike is the Chief Strategy Officer at Higher Achievement. In this role, he oversees program and strategic plan implementation, including mentoring, curriculum evaluation, and training across higher achievement sites in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, Richmond, Virginia, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Alexandria, Virginia, and Greenbelt, Maryland. He has a BA from Duke University and an executive certificate in nonprofit management from Georgetown University. Well, this webinar will explore a national definition of social emotional learning and how mentoring contributes to social emotional development. We will discuss successful strategies of integrating the Search Institute assets into a mentoring strategy, examples of other SEL approaches, some work on interviewing. We will not be covering today interviewing to assess SEL competency. That has been a change. And then also assessing SEL progress in program evaluation. Our objectives are to review SEL-related mentoring outcomes, review the definitions, approaches, and assessment, and to talk about strategies for group and individual mentoring. So what is social emotional learning? CASEL, which we'll go into in a little bit, defines it as the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, to set and achieve positive goals, to feel and show empathy for others, to establish and maintain positive relationships, and to make responsible decisions. Back up, please. Okay. I referenced CASEL earlier. CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. This is a national collaborative organization which is working to build sort of a national consensus around SEL competencies, practices, and also methods of evaluation. And their 5 competency areas are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. Next slide. Forward just a little bit more. So in this slide, we show you sort of a breakdown of the subsets of those competencies. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. So as you look at this particular slide, think about in your own programming, which of these do you think you address? And how does your program approach align with these definitions? So we're addressing how we understand ourselves, how do we work well with others, how do we make good decisions? Everything from resilience, managing anger, how you deal with conflict, how you deal with others is what underlies SEL learning. And we know we need to be intentional in doing this work. As those involved in mentoring, which of these competencies and attributes do you think you're using now? And as you consider that, let's go to the next slide. As we look at the mentoring outcome research, many of the positive benefits of mentoring are SEL related. So if we're involved in good mentoring programs, the chances are that we're already making an impact on at least some aspects of SEL. As you look at this particular paragraph from the mentoring effect, you're seeing that they have improved social skills and interaction with peers, more trusting relationships, better communication, and increased chances of continuing on to higher education, which reflects also positive goal setting and some of the other attributes listed on the previous slide. In my work with mentoring programs, I have found that good programs do contribute to SEL development. Next slide. A big brothers, big sisters school-based mentoring program evaluation found that the program had improved mentees' outcomes in a range of areas, including academic attitudes, performance, and behaviors. After 10 months, you're looking better. The youth are faring better in emotional, psychological well-being, social relationships, academic attitudes, and self-reported grades. I think also a very important point in this research is they noted reductions in depression symptoms across all groups who participated. Next slide, please. After 13 months of mentoring, youth also displayed greater acceptance by their peers and more positive beliefs about their ability to succeed in school and achieve better grades in school. Overall, mentored youth were more likely to show improvement on multiple social, emotional, and academic levels. At last count, 14 states have statewide educational standards that are built loosely around the CSEL model. In addition, the mindset attributes of growth mindset and grit are included in the Indiana standards. The National Mentoring Resource Center is a leader in producing materials to help mentors with these competencies. Next. A CSEL document identifies 126 different frameworks for SEL competencies. I've been working with SEL models since the early 70s, and it is a positive sign that a loose consensus is performing around definitions. J.A. Durlak has led research into best practices in developing SEL skills. This has led to the SAFE acronym, that SEL instruction needs to be sequenced, connected and coordinated activities to foster skill development. They need to be active forms of learning to help students master new skills. It needs to be focused, a component that emphasizes developing personal and social skills. And it needs to be very explicit in order to be effective. This process is very important, especially for group mentoring programs. We found if you're not having this kind of an organized strategy in group work with youth, that you do not produce the outcomes in a consistent manner. Next. So if you're going to be working with SEL competencies, especially in group mentoring programs, you need to create a plan that builds competencies in an ordered sequence. You need to create learning objectives and descriptions of how the activities help so that young people will know what's expected, and you need to design activities based on this plan. Another model that's having some influence in the field is the Foundations for Youth framework. This University of Chicago model looks at what competencies should be addressed and at what different ages. So again, we have self-regulation, knowledge, mindsets, and values. Key factors of being successful means having the agency make active choices about having the agency, the youth having the agencies, to make active choices about their life path, possessing competencies to adapt to the demands of different contexts, and incorporating different aspects of oneself into an integrated identity. So this model is focused about SEL on SEL competencies being a foundational piece of identity development. Next slide. I'm showing this graph because as you look at, and I invite you all to explore this model, the University of Chicago says that there are some things that you should start with at younger ages and be very intentional about developing competencies based on the developmental level of the youth. So you're really looking at knowledge and skills, self-regulation, being two of the first things that you work on. Then you work on values and mindsets, and then growing to more global competencies. So the inner circle reflects the you act and then you reflect on it. So I'm doing instruction and then I'm doing reflection on the instruction. And then the green area, the green bar, talks about the different core things that you're teaching. And then the outer bar really looks at what your long-term outcomes should be. I do invite you to explore this model because it has provided me good insight about what I need to be addressing at different age ranges with young people. So next up is my colleague, Darren Heil.
Thanks, Ray. This is a really exciting opportunity. So as Ray said, I started YMI back in 2007 with just a really heart to want to serve the school system because of the ratio of students to counselors, 300 or 400 to 1. And so YMI was really just created to really support our teachers, and it is really more than it's more of a community initiative rather than a mentor program in a school. That's what we do, but YMI was created to be a community initiative. And so, as you can see, right now, 300 some matches in 9 different schools in one city alone is really exciting. But I left YMI about 2 years ago to start something else. I do have a contract job with the Noblesville schools, doing the same thing, helping them create their own school-based mentor program. So when we started back in 2007, we had a loose knit, training model. We didn't really have a curriculum, but into our second year, we said we needed to find something. And so we found the 40 developmental assets from the Search Institute. And so what we did, we took 28 of those 40 assets and created a curriculum for 5th and 6th grade, and then for 7th through 12th grade. If you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so the 40 assets. We focused on the 20 internal assets and then the 8 external assets. And if you're familiar with the assets, you look for that online. I didn't provide that handout of all the assets, but out of the 20 external, we had those 8 we decided to focus on to create that curriculum around. So let's go to the next slide. So now for intermediate school here in Fishers, it's 5th and 6th grade. We wanted to create an activity piece. And so we found Search Institute content for some of that, or we created some of that ourselves. On the last slide you saw, we had counselors, teachers, youth pastors, all work together to create this curriculum. So that was the community piece. We're really excited about that. A lot of people came together to put this together. But so what you're looking at right now is kind of what they use right now for 5th and 6th grade. And under handouts, you will see off to the right, you'll see intermediate, mentor support around you. This is 5th grade week 1. If you want to pull that one up, and then also pull up the one that just says supports around you. So the one that says week 1, actually, what you're looking at, it says 4th grade. And the reason why it says 4th grade on the document is because I'm actually currently creating, using some of these to for the Noblesville program. So there's some differences there in the title. But that is what a mentor has when they walk into a mentor session. They go into the school, they sit down, they have that document in their hand, but then they also have the second one, which says the supports around you. So that's the activity piece that they use that when they're sitting down with their student, and it helps create that discussion. And you can see in the document that the mentor has, again, this is all created by volunteers, teachers, youth pastors. This gives them a breakdown of what to do when they're sitting down with their student. And so they do the project piece for 10 minutes, then they process it for 10 minutes. And if you have the supports handout in front of you, you see they have to put names in those circles. So then they process that, and then there's a walkout. Why My Mentor has one of these for every mentor session that they have while connecting with their student during the school year. So that is a 5th and 6th grade content. Again, I'm actually using some of that for another program, and they're going to start in 4th grade. But the idea is this is what we start with, and then we go back to that group that created this content, and for another year or two, we create more content solely based around the assets. So I want to go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide, Minnie. Okay, so now for junior high and high school, the mentor programs still the 28 assets, but we built those, we created discussion starters. And so you'll see the JPEG off to the right of the handouts, the junior high, senior high discussion starters. That actually is, you'll see a shot of week 2. And this is pulled straight from, some of this we pull straight from the Search Institute, but then we, again, that group of people, we created this entry-level question, this deeper level question, and a story prompt. And so it just, so the model is, you know, discussion based at the high school, the junior high and high school level, because the mentors go into the school, but they have this information with them, and to help them create a good discussion in that mentor session. And so again, we're really excited because this was all created from a group of people from the community using 40 developmental assets, excuse me. Yeah, go to the next slide. So as you can see, they have those 3 levels of questions for that story prompt. They're using it still, and again, they've created more content because there's only 28 of the 40 assets. And so as mentors go through this, they jump on the team that creates this content, and they change it up from year to year. But again, it's the 28 assets. So yeah, that's what they're doing.
So Darren, I know you work with this for a number of years. What would you say were the strengths of this approach?
Well, since their Search Institute put so much research, we felt very confident to use this. You know, there were many things we could have done, but since the program was a discussion-based model, we felt like with the strength of the community and focusing on those assets, it just worked. It works very well. And again, you know, having those assets, we can build around it, and it creates good conversation, and that's what kids need. They need people talking with them. You know, I heard one kid said, "I can go the whole day without having a meaningful conversation with an adult." And so when they jump into the Why My Mentor program, whatever school they're in, they get to have a good conversation, and that conversation is based on the assets.
One of the things I like about it, if you refer back to the Durlac model that we looked at earlier, the FACE model, your particular approach actually does follow that kind of a structure. So, you know, I was fortunate enough to observe your program evolve, and that I wanted to do that. In your later work, I think you've shared with me that you're also now using the relationship kind of coaching model that the Search Institute has.
Just begun, and so that's with the Noblesville program. And so I can't speak too much to it right now, but we are headed that direction with the Noblesville, yes.
Okay. And that offers, for those that don't know, their relationship model offers specific steps in coaching one-on-one or in groups with youth. So I invite people to explore the Search Institute model as a way of thinking about how you can structure things with especially one-on-one mentoring. So, well, next up is go ahead, Darren.
if I can jump in, I think, having counselors and teachers help create the curriculum, there's tons of buy-in when you use the Search Institute's content like the assets. And
Mm-hmm.
so if anyone is thinking of creating a program or looking for curriculum or content, that's a great place to start.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mike is up next. So, Mike DeMarco.
Hi, thanks. That's a great segue into some of the work that we've done at Higher Achievement. Just for some context, Higher Achievement is a college pipeline program for middle school students in grades 5 through 8. We operate in DC, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Richmond, and some of the surrounding cities around us. We have worked to really focus in on our SEL work, particularly around mentoring. Our program is an academic program, and we recognize that mentoring brings a really critical component to build these SEL skills. So one of the things that we had to do first was actually define the purpose of academic mentoring in our program. Previously, what happened is we were trying to do too much during this mentoring time. We were trying to do like academic skill building and SEL and relationship skills. And so we had to look at our program holistically and really refine what the purpose of mentoring was. To that end, we focus on like really the comparative advantage of this mentoring time is to work on the SEL skills, particularly through relationship building. Once we did that, that really helped like elucidate a pathway forward for us on how we would build our curriculum and training and supports for mentors to be able to have the time for relationship building, to have the results that we want. Another piece for our programs, we also focus on college readiness skills, particularly around the SEL categories. There's a lot of research that Ray went through in the beginning around the impact of mentoring, particularly SEL skills on college readiness. That can mean a lot of different things. For Higher Achievement, we define that as focusing on building self-efficacy, goal planning, as well as a sense of belonging and engagement in school. So once we were armed with these kind of definitions and defined purposes, we looked at our curriculum and looked at how we can build a curriculum and a program that would allow us to really maximize these benefits of mentoring. In the past, we used to build all of our resources in-house to really tailor it for our program. But one of the things that's just happened in the year since we last built our curriculum is there's just so many more open source materials. And so we instead did is we looked to find materials that were available publicly free, and then instead of focusing on building the best content, we focused then on building how mentors could best implement those programs. And kind of the thinking behind that is you can have the best curriculum in the world, but if a volunteer mentor can't implement it and is so focused trying to implement this curriculum and follow it word for word that they're not focusing on the relationships, you're not going to have the impact that matters. The other piece that we did here is to recognize the value of relationship building for SEL skills is that we had to intentionally build time into our program schedule for relationship building, for reflection, and for celebration. So to that end, we spent the first several weeks having really intentional prescribed relationship building activities that we gave to our mentors for them to work with their mentors and mentees. And that was something that was really helpful to help build that relationship from the start and build a lot of trust between mentors and mentees. Additionally, once that trust was built, we also wanted to build time into our schedule at the end of each curriculum unit for scholars and mentors to come together to reflect on their learnings, but also to reflect and have reflective conversations about how is this mentoring relationship going? Is this meeting everybody's needs? What can be done to improve it? And also having time to celebrate. The result of this, we've seen this really impact our scholars' SEL skills, and I can give a very specific example. Our scholars were working on a STEM curriculum where they were building, we were doing a flight unit and working on building some gliders. And we had a scholar in DC who was working on his glider and just kind of crumpled it up and said, this is stupid. And the mentor who was working on her glider, without even looking up, kind of just said, is this stupid or do you need help? And our middle school scholar said, I need help. And that just really, for me, encompassed how this relationship building has helped scholars build that self-efficacy to be able to advocate for those, but also ask for help when necessary. In addition to supplementing the work that we're doing around SEL, we have also created intentional training for mentors on taking a youth development approach to working with our scholars, so that they are asking two things in particular. There's two questions that we have. We train our mentors to ask to guide all practice. One is, what need is this youth trying to meet? And second is, what emotion is this youth feeling right now? And from there, all of our interactions and next steps can come. Finally, we put together, like I said, we focus a lot on the implementation. So while rolling out the curriculum, rather than just saying like, here's the curriculum, we put a lot of time into having really specific guided trainings and practice for mentors with like videos of suggested implementation, as well as like clear implementation guides to help them along the way. The result of this is that our mentors are coming into each session really comfortable with the curriculum content. And what that allows them to do is, because they're comfortable with the content, is to actually check in with the scholars and be mindful of building that relationship with them. We can go to the next slide. So just some of the lessons learned from our work and some ideas for programs. One is to make sure that we really are leveraging what's special about mentoring is the opportunity for these deep relationships and really to support this social emotional development. And in order to do it, you can't just hope that it happens, but want to make sure that you're intentionally creating time in your schedule for mentors to facilitate these SEL skills and to actually openly and naturally talk about this. What we look for and what we really, I think, value about mentoring is the opportunity for authentic learning opportunities, and you want to make sure that there's time for mentors and mentees to explore those opportunities naturally. Second, we really wanted to make sure that we were defining the scope of practice for a mentor in our program, particularly because we were dealing with more sensitive information and really more content that was more emotional, of course. And we wanted to make sure that we were defining for a mentor what their role is as a mentor, but also where the line is and where that they're not a social worker, they're not a counselor, and when to bring in our program staff to help them if the scholar discloses anything or there's anything like personal that needs to be shared out for the well-being of the student. And finally, I can't stress this enough, but the focusing on the clarity of implementation resources allowed our mentors to come into each mentoring session totally comfortable with the content, which allowed them to focus on relationship building. When I was observing programs in the past, I used to see mentors really spending a lot more of their time looking down at paper to follow a curriculum. And what I'm seeing now is papers kind of sitting on the side of the desk, but mentors looking at their scholars and engaging, leaning forward, engaging in conversation with them. And that's where you see this relationship building happening. Good, next slide. And just some examples, some of these I've mentioned already, but resources that we have leveraged in our program. One, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence has, we participated in a training around Ruler, which is around emotional regulation. It has a mood meter, which is a pretty quick and easy way for adults and youth to check in on just how they are feeling right now. That was one of the key questions that I said we want to be asking our youth is, what are you feeling right now? And it gives them tools to be empowered to feel those feelings, to name those feelings, but also to make a decision if that's how they want to feel or if they want to make a choice to feel something else. Ray mentioned all the great resources from CASEL, which have really great resources for program implementation as well as evaluation. And also Mentor put together a great social and emotional learning and early adolescence guide, which is pictured right there. And if you want to learn more about higher achievement's featured in this. So if you want to learn more about the work of higher achievement, how we incorporate SEL, there's a great case study on higher achievement here as well.
Referring to the NMRC document, I agree with Mike. There's some really good information in there and some really good examples about how to implement SEL learning within your mentoring programs. CASEL and others recommend that programs develop systematic evaluation strategies so that we can have a good idea of the amount of impact we're having on the youth we serve. They offer a very good assessment guide, and they have a national collaborative dedicated to improving SEL program evaluation, which they're likely to invite you to join. The Aperture Educational Foundation has the DESA, which is an observational tool, which is a good beginning tool for assessing younger mentees. For small programs, that tool can be somewhat expensive, but if you've got a fairly large program, it's a very good tool for helping you identify where a young person is when they're starting a process with SEL. It also looks at relationship qualities. Paramount is another organization, Paramount Education, that has social emotional evaluation tools. Their tools also go into the quality of support that young people feel from the adults in their lives. And then the last one I've been exposed to is the Lions Lead. They have a online behavior and skill assessments for late elementary through high school that provides both detailed information and group summaries that can be used to drive needs-based programming. As I've been working with the NMRC and other mentoring, and underneath their leadership, been working with mentoring programs in Indiana for the last several years, evaluation tends to be one of the things that we are starting to discuss very frequently. And as in all other areas of practice, people want to know how we know we're making a difference. So I think it's an important thing for you to consider having a pre-assessment strategy and having some kind of strategy for how you're going to know you're moving forward. I think Mike made some really good points in terms of program structure. And I really liked it when you talked about the fact that now your mentors are looking at your mentees rather than looking at the piece of paper. I think he's given you some really good guidelines about how to develop your curricula and how to train your mentors and your staff. So there's with the CSEL products, you also have a number of resources available on the website, and including checklists for behaviors. There's a number of standardized assessments that are quick and simple to use. And so I do encourage you to look at developing what your evaluation strategy needs to be. So it's time for questions.
Great,
So
thank you so much, Ray, Darren, and Mike. This is Minnie Chen. Been moderating the questions box thus far, so you have quite a few questions. So definitely, we have lots of time too. So if you all in the audience have more questions, definitely a great place to spark some discussion as well. So I will start off with a question I received. This person wants to know if you all could provide more examples of ways mentors can help their mentees develop their SEL skills. If you have any, based on your experiences, some concrete examples, best practices, they'd love to hear more about that.
Hey, this is Mike. I'm happy to start. I think for us, we do a lot of making sure that scholar, one, I think you want to define what SEL skills you're looking to develop. There's hundreds of different skills, there's 40, there's all sorts of different frameworks. So one, I would say that, but for me, some of the most important things is that we want to make sure that our higher achievement scholars are having time to actually reflect on what they're doing, and that mentors are giving supportive pushes to help develop those skills. And one of the phrases that we use a lot to help give that picture is we want our mentors to be not sages on the stage with our scholars, but guides on the side. And that by being that guide on the side, being that supportive presence to help develop the skills, help them feel safe, but ultimately giving them the chance to grow and learn. And I think most importantly, to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, what they can do better next time.
Darren, do you have things to contribute? You've done this a long time.
Yes, I have done this for a long time. To be honest with you, the YMI model, really simple, really straightforward. We only focused on the use of the developmental assets, and we honestly never went beyond that. I think it's more because of kind of my angle and approach to mentoring was simply building and creating the opportunity for that relationship. I'm familiar with the SEL content, but we just really focused on the assets. So I really can't offer much more beyond that.
Okay. So my work recently, I've been doing a lot of work at getting very discreet in what we mean within each SEL competency. What kind of behaviors are we looking for? How are we going to know? How is the young person and the mentor going to know that that they're on target? So I tend to look at and train people in, say, for example, in managing emotions. And there's some really good, if you look at the educational materials that are on the Castle site in Indiana, if you look up SEL, Indiana Education online, we can actually send you some, I think we'll be able to make sure that you have the links for accessing their guidebook. But in Indiana's guidebook, they actually have the kinds of very specific techniques, very specific behaviors that you really want to see. So when I'm looking at managing emotions, can the young person identify what they're feeling? So you really want to discuss and ask questions around what is this feeling, what's behind this feeling, and then like self-talk and other kind of skills that you can do. Self-confidence is what do you believe you can do? So we really need to look at very specific kinds of behaviors that the youth need to do more of, and to some extent that the youth need to do less of. So as you get very discrete in your definitions around that, that also makes it much easier to evaluate what you're doing down the road. Are you actually seeing increases in these key behaviors that you want to see? Are you seeing increases in listening? Are you actually seeing is the young person interacting with people? Are they thinking before they act? So being very specific in the targeted behaviors that you want. I agree with Darren's approach, and I think and Mike both of the other panelists have talked about the main important thing that you have to do is make sure that your mentors are trained and are able to develop good mentoring relationships. I will say as an aside, another thing that's happening in the field when you're implementing SEL programs is people need to take a hard look at the SEL competencies of the staff in the program and of the mentors. Do the mentors have the SEL competencies so in such a way that they're able to model that competency to their youth? I ran into one situation where we were assessing SEL skills of adults and assessing SEL skills of youth, and we found that there were some key competencies that the adults we were recruiting scored low, and in some cases lower than the youth we were mentoring. So Cassell's work and the implementation within school systems are telling you that you need to start with the faculty first, and you need to start with the adult mentors first, and make sure that you're actually seeing the skills and behaviors in your mentors and training to that. And then beyond that, looking at very discrete definitions. I'm moving towards the Cassell definitions in my work because I think in the long run, being aligned with kind of a national language and a national consistent approach makes a lot of sense. I hope that at least began to address that question.
Great, thank you all. So we have another question around kind of family and parent engagement and kind of how do you get kind of parents to recognize the value of SEL. This person's question was, how do you share the value of time designated to SEL with parents? In particular, I'm thinking of parents who are less familiar with the American school system or way of teaching, parents often would like to see mentors focus on homework and may view SEL activities and practices as being the antithesis of academic support. So kind of how do you kind of share and like communicate with parents the value of SEL?
Mike, you want to address that first? Is that part of your program?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually, last year we had the opportunity to partner with a group called Learning Heroes that does this exact question. And they actually have a lot of open source materials. They have a whole playbook for running family engagement meetings. Like it's honestly like a scripted meeting with PowerPoint slides, posters you can put up in the school. That is designed to like really communicate the value of SEL with parents, and it's also designed to connect schools and parents and like out of school time programs, mentoring programs. So that there's just really great resources there from Learning Heroes. The other thing that we do is we've focused pretty deeply on with this curriculum on being able to communicate what our scholars are doing it with their mentors, and so we send before each unit we send newsletters. So we automatically have queued up newsletters to go home via email and also paper copies to go home with families. And we invite them to the end of showcase celebrations. And just in talking about our program, I think it is important to name like, okay, we do in a higher achievement, we do have a specific homework held time, but then also they are going to be working with their mentor on these curricula and focusing specifically on SEL skills. And so it's been helpful to really be clear with parents the what you're doing and also the why. And just like to sum it up, that Learning Heroes also has just really excellent resources for that.
Thank you. Darren, anything to contribute to this one?
Honestly, like I said, the model that we have is very straightforward, very simple. Obviously, there's a lot of value in the social emotional learning. And looking at this in the slide again, I can see since we focus solely on the developmental assets, I think you can see a lot of those in some of these pieces here, like identifying emotions,
right.
Perspective taking, empathy, communication. It kind of it's a different way of looking at it, and so so when communicating to parents, the value of this, I guess I would talk about it differently because we focus on the assets, but it's all this, it really, they both overlap and align and complement each other.
Okay. In my work, recently I worked with a middle school and we did a pre-assessment of were the actual competencies of the young people. And we had a meeting with the parents and went over what the group profile looked like. So for example, in this particular group, we had really low levels of empathy, really low levels of kindness, really low levels of gratitude, some of the other skills that we were measuring. And we talked about that. And we also had a conversation about, if this is true, is this something you're seeing at home? Most of the time, the parents were aligning themselves and saying, yes, these are challenges we have as parents in addition to what you're seeing at school. So we actually set out with them to say, okay, we need your help in reinforcing these skills. And the program developed materials and shared each week what they're doing and how the parent, and had a conversation with the parents about what we were doing and what they can, they're still in the process right now, what we're doing and then what they can do to help. The biggest thing we asked for was for the parents to really focus on modeling the skills themselves and catching themselves. So we actually set up with the parents being part of the planning process and identifying key competencies that particular group of youth needed. Now, this was a very high challenge. This was a group with a lot of challenge. This was a mentoring program set up to counter behavioral problems in the school. So that particular framework was useful. But then also, whenever you're doing, for a number of years now, I really focus on having mentoring programs work and develop individual kind of goals for each of their mentees, 1 to 3 goals per the school year or whatever period of time you have, and then having those goals and what you're trying to do shared with the parents so that the parents know what it is that everybody's trying to accomplish. Another piece with that is I really advise mentoring programs to make, if you're going to have tutoring programs, make it a tutoring program. If you're going to have mentoring programs, especially with young youth, not so much with what Mike's doing with the academic preparation, but when you're working with younger students, try to separate your tutoring time from your mentoring time, because the tutoring time, especially with low achieving students, tends to interfere with the quality of relationship development that's needed to do the SEL work. So I tend to, like I'm working with a youth assistance program right now, and they have both a tutoring strategy and they have an SEL strategy, and they're 2 separate strategies.
Great.
So I hope that's helpful.
We have another question here kind of on the topic of assessment strategies and how you measure your progress.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question on, do you have more suggestions about assessment styles, as well as kind of how do you score or evaluate these competencies?
Mike, again, I'll see if you've got something to contribute first.
Yep. So we, again, we outlined the specific SEL skills that we're looking to build and did some research for like question banks to be able to assess that. So we assess our scholars at the end of each unit. One thing that we used to do in the past that we've learned from, we used to assess at the end of the year, but that was something that was really challenging because the year would end and then several months would pass before we could actually like act on that data. So now we're actually assessing at the end of each unit, so that we have time for scholars and mentors to then like put that data into action. And again, we've focused that assessment around like the SEL skills that we want to see within the curriculum around self-efficacy and belonging and goal planning, etc. And then the other is one more piece that I totally just forgot. I'll let you know when I think about it with this. Oh, the other thing, assessment. The other thing with assessment, this is less assessment, it's more about reflection, but we also are assessing through like narrative of having reflective conversations with scholars and mentors to also like have a discussion and assess between themselves how the mentoring relationship is going so that we can learn and grow from that as well.
I like the idea of assessing after each unit. Keeps it fresh in people's mind. I think assessment is still evolving as the largest or the greatest challenge. That's why CSEL has a whole group that's dedicated to it. In my recent work, I've actually been using the Lions Lead assessment. And what I like about that is that it gives you very, very specific feedback, both for the individuals and the group. And so you can take a front end look at your group and begin to actually identify their SEL competencies and their SEL challenges up front. And then you can follow up on that. So that's been useful, and it's a very discrete set of measures. The DESA tools tend to be very similar in the sense that they measure very discrete things, and you can follow up on that and identify and target the areas of instruction. I apologize, I'm worried about my dog running around upstairs and dropping his dog bone. So I think assessment's one of the most challenging aspects. I think part of your overall piece is to first assess what your group needs. We tend to come, and I'm again talking about younger group, pre-high school kinds of work. Taking a good look and individually assessing what everybody needs and being able to work with that and know that you're able to, excuse me, I'm getting a little interruption here. to take a look at individual needs and then design or bring in curricula pieces that address the individual needs. I really like being able to focus in with for programs that do combinations of individual and group mentoring. There are some things that you can work with, assess, and that are better able to be taught in groups. For example, listening skills, collaboration skills, things along that line are best addressed in a group mentoring strategy. Anything that has to do with self-confidence, anything that has to do with very discrete skills that you can have one-on-one conversations and dialogue with mentors and have those skills modeled and have more impact. So my two favorite tools for you to explore actually are the DESA, especially with younger youth, because it's designed specifically to allow you to observe behaviors and then do your interventions and observe changes in behaviors. And I like the Lions Lead skills, the Lions Lead tools for really 5th grade and up, because it's online. It's an online assessment, but it allows you again to look at very discrete attributes and competencies and strengths and challenges, and then you can both look at what the whole group needs, and then you can look at what each individual needs, and then target your program and do post assessments using either one of these. I think those are probably the two that I have the most confidence in with my own personal use. And the folks that have developed the DESA are very engaged with CASEL in terms of moving forward the whole assessment strategies for SEL.
Great, thank you. And just to build off of that question in terms of assessments and kind of the resources you shared, I think there's still a few questions from folks about working on a one-to-one setting. And if you all mentioned that depends on the kind of the SEL skills you're looking to build, but I think folks just kind of want, if you could provide some more examples about activities working on a one-to-one setting with a mentee that's not like kind of not require you to like formally sit down with the materials or some sort of curriculum, but just kind of best practices or just examples of what mentees can be doing with their mentors.
Mike, you want to kick in first again?
Well, one thing with higher achievement that's different is we don't do one-to-one mentoring. We do one mentor with a group of 3 scholars.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can think a little bit more about how we do that, but our model is a little bit different.
Okay. So I'll just take the first one would be self-confidence. So one of the things that you can have with young people and you can build in just conversations about what do you see as your strengths? What are you confident doing? What is it that you feel like you're hesitant to try? What is it you're hesitant to learn? What are you hesitant to practice? And then actually having the mentor coaching the young person, designing an activity and coaching them in terms of moving ahead on the areas in which they feel they lack confidence. Part of that might be coaching them in terms of what does it actually mean to have the skill? How do you practice? How do I do it? How do other people do it? But begin to zero in on what they're confident about, what they're not, and then starting to look at coaching the young person in specific areas in which they feel a lack of confidence. Managing emotions, very much the same way. Which emotions what are you comfortable with in your life? Are there any particular feelings or emotions that you find yourself getting stuck in? And then talking to them about what are different ways or having curriculum around I think Mike referenced the Yale approach, but scaling what you're feeling now, talking about how they respond to that. A lot of the mentoring that I see happening is around the managing emotions competency. So having curricula available that can help young people identify what they're feeling, and then what is it that happens before they feel that, what are they telling themselves, and then beginning to coach them in managing those critical feelings. Positive attitude, you can actually ask them specifics about what kinds of, where do they feel good about things? Where do they feel like they have a positive attitude? Where do they feel like they don't? And then begin to, again, work on the specific behaviors that would help them have a stronger attitude. With gratitude, I coach people with things about what are you thankful for, discussions, both individually and in group. What are you thankful for today? What do you like in your life? Self-directedness, you do a lot of you work with kids on individual goals. One thing they'd like to accomplish in the next 4 months. It could be, and this, I don't know if you all have, this is another model within the Search Institute that I think is really useful. I help programs integrate the whole idea of sparks from the Search Institute, where you're helping young people identify one thing they love and then becoming what we call a spark sponsor, or the mentor commits to helping the young person explore something that they really love to do. It could be learning to play guitar, it could be learning to ride a horse, but building in, helping someone develop a love that they have, because we know that from the Sparks research, if you help a young person identify what they love and then follow through on what they love and develop competency in it, it doesn't really matter what it is. That particular pattern of following my passion can bridge across to other competencies. So the Sparks model within the Search Institute is something that I integrate. I have a lot of conversations in the purpose-directed work about what is important to you, about values and what's important in life. And I ask young people a lot of questions, or I teach people to ask young people a lot of questions about their future. What kind of human being do they want to be? What kind of friend do they want to be? What kind of lifestyle they want? The last thing I do is talk about careers, but really begin to help young people build personal vision around the kind of life they want to create and the kind of social interactions that they think they want to have in their life as adults. I hope these are helpful.
Hey, Ray.
Yes.
So this is really where, I think using the developmental assets really shines, because as I'm looking at the internal list of assets, asset 21, achievement, motivation, then learning engagement, homework, bonding to school, reading for pleasure, caring, integrity, honesty, resistance skills, self-esteem. Those are just some of those. And so then we created the questions, a level question, a deeper level question, and a story prompt around all those things. And it created really good discussions with these kids. And so it's, so to answer, I guess, going back to the question, this is a really good practice, in my opinion, when you teach, train mentors to ask, like you said, ask good questions,
right,
and follow up. But the beauty of this, it gives a mentor the roadmap. Using the assets with story prompts and questions around those assets, it provides a great roadmap, even for like new mentors. Then you have your seasoned mentors, and they can take this content and kind of go with it, the way they want to. But it's asking good questions and learning how to follow up. So that's my take on it.
And I agree with that take. That's one of the reasons I wanted to invite you to be part of this webinar, because I think that's one set of easily accessible and understanding assets or competency models that most mentors can sit down and go, okay, I can do that, especially if you build some questions around it. Instead of just rambling on about more examples, I'd like to check back with Minnie and sort of see where we are.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all so much for just your insights and perspectives. I think we'll do I'm seeing one more question on the topic of kind of curriculum and resources. I think there's a lot of questions that you all highlighted, a bunch of different resources. So if any of you all want to just type them in the chat box so the audience can see them, that'd be great. And everyone can definitely access the PowerPoint after this as well. But I think there's just some more questions in terms of like what is available. I think, Darren, there was a question focused on if they could get the full set of the senior high school discussion starters, and also if any of you all had other recommended resources, especially for folks who mentor survivors or at-risk youth.
Yeah, I definitely would love to provide those discussion starters because, again, they were generated from members, from mentors, educators, other people in the community. And so I think it could create a great foundation for any organization who wants to follow that model. It really is collaborative, and it gives a lot of buy-in. And so, yes, I can have that available. And so just to be clear, I help coordinate all this content being created. And so technically it's really not YMI content anymore. They still use it, but it's also mine. And then it's also going to be Noblesville's as well. And so, yes, it is available. I just need to figure out how to get it to whoever wants it.
Great, thank you. And actually, I think we still have time for one more question. I think this is also a great question in terms of suggestions for working with young people or children who, definitely are struggling, who are resistant, don't talk as much, or as well as kind of how do you all take into account other aspects of identity, such as gender and race, specifically respect to social and emotional learning.
I can just real quick. I would say, and this probably seems very simplistic, and I'm sorry, but to me it makes sense. Simply be present, regardless of where a kid is and what they are going through. I sat down with the interview for the kid several years ago, and he was not responding well in the mentor sessions, and his mentor was frustrated. The school was concerned. I ended up interviewing this kid at the end, and he never looked at me, but he said, "I'm so glad my mentor comes in to see me." So you never know what the power of your presence is going to be in a kid's life. So sorry if it seems really simplistic. I'm just talking from 20 years of experience working with kids. They simply want someone to be present.
And Manny, can you repeat that question for me?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of a combination of a few questions that I've received, just in terms of working with children who might be quiet. What are some ways to encourage them to kind of share any specific examples? Also, in respect to other aspects of identity and things that young people experience, how do you kind of incorporate social emotional learning?
Well, I think the first thing is to really train your mentors on how to be with and how to accept that kind of quietness. It takes a while, and when we're really looking at the percentage of our children that come into mentoring programs that have histories of trauma, gender identity issues or confusion or whatever different, there's a wide variety of what we see. So I think training mentors in those kind of areas is an important piece. At least having your staff ready to coach mentors when they run into things that they may not have had experience with in the past. But the people tend to overestimate how rapidly young people will share. They'll tend to think that we'll sit down and this will happen right away. But frankly, a lot of the youth I serve through my consulting work and through the programs that I see are really traumatized, or they have they're poverty kids. They have a lot of other issues going on in their lives. They may not have good relationships at home. So taking the time to be with and really accept where they are and really training people to do that. And then have some key questions where you're always starting with assets, starting with what the child is already likes, what they're good at, really encouraging their worldview. How do you see that? Where you're really training your staff to be able to set. Part of the piece is, the first step in working with any child is felt safety. What are you doing to help the child feel safe with you? And felt safety needs to happen before you're going to have any meaningful interaction. And felt safety takes time. In group mentoring programs, that means helping them not just become comfortable with the mentors, but also comfortable with the group. So there's a model of forming, storming, norming, performing that you really have to spend a lot of time early on with your group mentoring to build the relationships within the group. In individual work, it's a very similar process in the sense that young people will sometimes passively resist, and then they'll honestly sometimes try to sabotage the relationship. They may challenge you. They may not believe you care for them. So being able to stay with and be honest and transparent when you're running into those kind of things is an important part of mentor training. So these are not simple questions. These are, I think, some of the most complex questions we have to answer. And the time that one of the biggest things I see for volunteer mentoring programs is we're asking people to do work of, well-trained child and youth care workers in many cases, without the same level of training that the child and youth care profession recommends. So integrating your training, your initial training, making sure that does include how to develop relationships and listening with the youth, but also having like quarterly refresher trainings, and then having your staff trained to coach the specific kinds of issues that the mentors are going to run into, I think are all very critically important.
Yeah, if I can.
Sorry, just quickly, I want to add just to that question and to build on what Ray said. Just with some of the curriculum resources I shared actually do a really good job of this. One of the things that Higher Achievement did when we did a landscape scan for curriculum resources was that it was culturally relevant and something that like our scholars could relate to. And two, in particular, the youth communications curriculum has very diverse perspectives that really, I think, like all people could identify with. And second, Design for Change is a curriculum that's built around social emotional learning that really teaches our scholars to like understand the perspectives of others that may be similar or different from them. Same with youth communications. And so I think that that's also a great jumping off point to build these SEL skills.
I want to, real quick, I just think this is still relevant to what the question was. So YMI, the model they have is one-on-one, school-based. The mentor goes in and connects with the student. And again, like I said, to be present. But, these are caring adults. They're not professionals necessarily. They might have a professional background, but they're caring adults. And so they have to have support. They're, the way YMI trained their mentors was these mentors were not lone wolves. They were not out there on their own. They knew who to go to if they had a problem, and they had the support in the school and outside of the school through the YMI staff. And so, if they come across something that's maybe difficult or challenging, they know they have someone they can go to. And that's extremely important. If they do not have that, things can get difficult for them.
Agreed. That's all I have on that question for the time being. I think we're up against the end of our time frame. So everybody, as we go forward, please answer the survey questions at the end of the webinar. Your handout does have a number of other resources available, so please answer the survey questions. You will get an email with information on how to download the slides. recording and resources, and we'll probably have some additional resources coming to you in the next few days. Be sure to visit the CMWS page on the Mentor website for an archive of all past webinars